Welcome to Hauntcore Vault. If you are ready for horror tales, you are in the right place. If you are new, please subscribe to the channel. I'd love to know where are you from and what time you are watching. Let's begin.
I was about 15 when this happened. A weird, unsettling Thanksgiving I still think about sometimes. My grandparents had a tiny farm tucked into a hollow. It wasn't a real farm, just enough land and animals to sustain themselves, at least back when they were younger. By the time I was a teenager, though, they were too old to keep up with the place, and the barn had basically turned into a dusty storage shed that no one bothered with anymore. Every Thanksgiving and Christmas, we'd make the trip to their house, and that year was no different. We had dinner early, around 2, and afterward I found myself getting restless. I'd hit that age where sitting around with adults while they retold the same old stories just wasn't appealing anymore. I told my parents I was going to walk around the hollow for a bit. I didn't even think to invite my younger siblings. I just wanted some time alone. I set out knowing I didn't have a lot of daylight left. But if you've ever explored woods, you know how easy it is to lose track of time. One hill leads to another, one trail leads to a clearing, and next thing you know, the woods are swallowing the sun. By the time I realized how dark it had gotten, I was nowhere close to home. When I finally made it back, it had been pitch black for at least an hour. I'd never really been near the barn at night, and seeing it then, the huge dark shape, the sagging roofline, was unexpectedly creepy. Being a 15-year-old who liked scaring himself, I had the brilliant idea to go inside. Getting in was easy. My grandparents were the type who barely locked their front door, let alone the barn. It had one of those big wooden beam locks. I still don't know what they're called, but I lifted it and pulled the door open. The hinges shrieked like something dying. It surprised me that it moved at all. I was sure it would be rusted shut. Inside was completely dark. Luckily, I had my phone with its flashlight. Funny how a little bit of light can make a dark place 10 times creepier instead of less. The beam of my phone caught all sorts of old tools hanging from the walls, rusty saws, hooks, blades. There was a small hatchet lying on the workbench, the metal stained a dark brown. I picked it up, forgetting to be grossed out, and realized it was crusted in old blood. I figured it was from when my grandparents used to butcher animals and never bothered to clean it. The barn had a hayloft, and I climbed up the ladder to explore. As I swept my light across the piles of hay, something shiny reflected back at me. Curious, I went over and started brushing away the hay. That's when I saw the empty eye sockets staring up at me. I screamed and lurched backward, nearly tumbling off the loft. Heart pounding, I scrambled down the ladder, then bolted out of the barn without even shutting the door. I ran straight into the house and blurted out what I'd found. My dad, who's basically built like Hulk Hogan, didn't hesitate. He grabbed a flashlight and went out to see for himself. My grandparents called the sheriff. They later learned the body had been in the loft for about 3 years. The victim had several hatchet wounds, and the sheriff told us they matched the hatchet I'd picked up, the murder weapon I'd casually held without knowing. That alone messed me up, but what really haunted us was the idea that my grandparents had lived on that quiet little farm for 3 years without knowing a dead man was hidden just a few yards from their back door. No one was ever arrested. To this day, we have no idea who he was or who killed him, or why he was left in our barn.
I used to think that going to college straight out of high school was the most intimidating thing I'd ever do. I grew up in a tiny town. My graduating class had maybe 100 kids, and suddenly I was thrown into a campus with more than 50,000 students. It felt like a city that never stopped moving. I'd never seen so many people in one place, constantly buzzing, constantly alive. But that culture shock was nothing, absolutely nothing, compared to what I felt during Thanksgiving break. I didn't have the money to go home that year, so I stayed behind in my dorm. What I didn't realize was that staying behind didn't just make me one of the few people left in my building. It made me one of the few people left on the entire campus. The place that had felt like a human beehive a week earlier turned into a completely abandoned wasteland almost overnight. As if the emptiness wasn't eerie enough, a snowstorm rolled in the night before Thanksgiving. I remember waking up around 7 in the morning and looking out my window. Everything, buildings, sidewalks, trees, was buried under a uniform sheet of untouched snow. Not a single footprint, not a single car, not a single person. It was beautiful, but in the way that cemeteries are beautiful, quiet, frozen, and deeply unsettling. I stayed in my room the entire Wednesday before Thanksgiving, just sitting at my desk and staring out at the emptiness. I didn't even have the nerve to go outside. Something about the stillness made me feel like I wasn't supposed to disturb it. By Thanksgiving Day, though, the isolation was getting to me. I had bought a microwavable frozen turkey meal, but the idea of eating my sad little dinner alone in my room suddenly made me feel pathetic. There was a Denny's on campus, one of the only places still open, so I decided to walk there for an actual meal. Dinner itself was fine, but there was a guy in the restaurant who wouldn't stop staring at me. He never looked away. Not when he ate, not when I glanced at him. Not even when the waitress came by his table. Something about his eyes made my stomach twist. Normally, I'm the kind of person who lingers over meals, but I couldn't get out of there fast enough. Walking back through the snow-covered campus, I found myself constantly checking over my shoulder. And after the third or fourth time, I noticed him, the man from Denny's, following me. And he wasn't just following me. He was closing the distance. By the time I reached the dorm's front door, he was already coming up the steps. He called out, asking me to hold the door for him. I didn't. He looked far too old to be a student, and if he actually lived there, he'd have his own key card to get in. I swiped in quickly and let the door shut behind me. As I hurried up the stairs, I glanced back through the glass. He was standing in the foyer, staring in. I have no idea how much time passed. I tried distracting myself on my computer, pretending nothing had happened. Then, out of nowhere, there was a knock on my door. I froze. I walked to the peephole, and there he was. The same man, staring straight into the peephole, as if he could see me through it. I had no idea how he got into the building, and no idea how he found my room. I didn't answer. I just backed away slowly and sat down at my desk, barely breathing. He knocked a few more times, and then he left. Hours passed, 5, maybe more, and just when I'd convinced myself I imagined the whole thing, there was another knock. This time, it was campus police. I opened the door, confused, and they came inside. They told me another student in the building had been attacked earlier in the day and asked if I'd seen anyone suspicious. I told them everything: Denny's, the staring, the following, the knocks. They exchanged looks, then asked me to come with them to identify a suspect they had detained. And sure enough, it was him. The man who'd followed me. The man who'd stood outside my dorm room. The man who, apparently, had been going door to door in the building, knocking on each one until someone opened up. Someone finally had. And they paid a terrible price for it.
I'm not telling you the city. I'm not telling you the state. All I'll say is this. Every year, this place hosts one of the biggest Thanksgiving Day parades in the country. You've seen it on TV. You'd probably recognize the floats. I'd watched it my whole life, but one year, I finally decided to go in person.
No one wanted to go with me. No one wanted to stand outside freezing for hours, so I went alone. The streets were already overflowing with people by the time I got there. Bodies pressed shoulder to shoulder, strangers bumping into strangers. Noise, color, excitement. I squeezed into a small gap behind another group, close enough to see the parade, but boxed in tightly on all sides. Then I saw him. There was nothing obviously wrong with him. No wild, erratic behavior, no shouting. Just a big, scruffy-looking man who somehow stood out like a shadow in daylight. I couldn't explain it. Something about him just hooked into the edge of my awareness. I kept glancing at him without meaning to. And every time, he caught me looking. Each time our eyes met, I snapped my gaze away, embarrassed, but the urge to check on him only grew stronger. His irritation was obvious, his jaw tightening, his brow lowering, and still my eyes kept drifting back toward him, like my brain was whispering, "Watch him, watch him." When I finally realized he was closer, I tried to brush it off. People move in crowds, they shift, they squeeze forward. But every time I dared to check, he had closed more distance. Subtle, casual, like he knew exactly how to move without drawing attention. So I tested it. I slipped back through the crowd toward the sidewalk. And he immediately changed course. Not an accident, not coincidence, he was following me, pushing through bodies, navigating gaps with single-minded focus. A cold, crawling fear worked its way up my spine, but I kept telling myself the same stupid thing. You're surrounded by thousands of people. He can't do anything. Not here, not in public. Crowds make you feel safe, but that's the lie. He finally slid into the space behind me. One person separated us, just one, and when that person stepped away, he stepped in. Close, too close. I was half a second from moving when I felt something sharp jab into my lower back. A knife, held low, hidden by the press of bodies. Anyone looking at us would have seen nothing suspicious, just another person packed into the crowd. He leaned in so close I could feel his breath on the back of my neck and whispered, low and furious, "Why were you staring at me?" My mouth went dry. No sound came out. He pressed the knife harder. "Why were you looking at me?" I stammered, apologized, told him I didn't mean to stare. I told him I didn't even know why I kept glancing at him. He didn't believe me. His voice was trembling with anger, or fear, or delusion, I still don't know. He asked me how much McMahon was paying me. His tone made it sound like a name I was supposed to know, like it explained everything. I whispered that I didn't know who McMahon was. He pushed the blade harder. "Tell me the truth." The crowd roared around us. Music, cheering, floats passing by, and behind it all, just for a second, I heard my own voice crack as I begged him to leave me alone. Somehow, maybe because I raised my voice without realizing it, two men nearby heard. They turned, saw our posture, and immediately stepped toward us. "What's going on?" one of them asked. For a moment, the man behind me didn't move. I felt his hand trembling. I thought that was it, right there. I thought he was going to bury the knife in my back before anyone realized what was happening. But then, something must have clicked for him. He knew he couldn't stab me and slip away unnoticed in this crowd. Not anymore. He lowered the knife, tucked it away, and backed off into the throng. The two men didn't chase him, they just stayed with me, kept asking if I was okay. I could barely answer. To this day, I never learned who McMahon was. Maybe he was real. Maybe he wasn't. All I know is that I've never looked at strangers the same way again. Not after learning how easily someone can press a knife into your back without anyone else noticing. Not after realizing how alone you can be in a crowd of thousands.
I grew up with everything I could ever need. A comfortable home, a good family, never having to wonder where my next meal was coming from.
Maybe that's why I always felt such a pull toward giving back. Every Thanksgiving, I volunteered at a homeless shelter, served food, cleaned up, stayed overnight, made sure people who had almost nothing got at least one warm, safe day a year. But 10 years ago, everything I believed about that safety shattered. The day had gone smoothly. Familiar faces, the ones that came back year after year. The faces that made me happy and sad at the same time. Happy they were still alive. Heartbroken that they were still homeless. There was only one unfamiliar man that year. Scruffy, agitated, eyes constantly darting around like he was watching threats no one else could see. At dinner, he tried grabbing another man's plate straight out of his hands. According to the rules, I should have removed him from the shelter immediately. But it was Thanksgiving. So instead, I separated them, warned the man, and let him stay. That choice haunts me. The night quieted down. People settled onto their cots. I stayed in the small office, drinking stale coffee, fighting off exhaustion. Around 3 in the morning, one of the regulars walked in, pale and trembling. He said someone had been stabbed. I sprinted into the sleeping area and saw the man who'd nearly had his food stolen lying on his cot, blood soaking through the blanket, already gone. His eyes still open, his face still peaceful, like he'd been asleep when it happened. I flipped on the lights, heart banging in my throat. I searched for the newcomer from dinner, but he was gone. The bathroom window was open, cold air drifting in. He'd slipped out into the night without a sound. One man dead over a plate of food. And worse, he would still be alive if I had done my job. If I had followed the rules instead of letting guilt, pity, and the meaning of a holiday sway me. Thanksgiving hasn't felt the same since.
I moved out of my parents' house the moment I turned 18. Not because of them. I just wanted to be on my own, in the city, living life the way adults lived it. My first Thanksgiving alone felt like a milestone, or at least it was supposed to. Instead, it became one of the worst nights of my life. I worked the day before and the day after Thanksgiving that year, so I couldn't go home. I bought myself a sad, oversized TV dinner and figured it would be enough. But after I ate it, the silence of my tiny studio apartment pressed in on me like a weight. I hadn't expected loneliness to feel physical. So I went for a walk. The streets were nearly empty, eerily so, especially in a city where I was used to crowds no matter the hour. The cold drove me back after a while, craving the warmth of my apartment. When I got home, I put my key in the lock, stepped inside, and closed the door behind me. Nothing seemed out of place. The studio only had one other room, the bathroom. I kept the door closed out of habit. After walking around in the freezing air for hours, I really needed to use it. I didn't bother turning on the light. There was enough glow from the apartment to see what I was doing. Halfway through, a strange, cold feeling prickled down my neck, a sense of being watched. I turned slightly toward the shower, where the small bathroom window was located, expecting maybe a bird on the sill. But instead, behind the translucent shower curtain, I saw the blurry, unmistakable outline of a person, and he was staring directly at me. I screamed, stumbled backward, nearly slipping on the tile. The curtain jerked open, and a man, stranger, intruder, burglar, stepped out. I scrambled out of the bathroom as fast as I could, but he lunged after me, grabbing me from behind. I thought he was going to kill me right there on my floor. Instead, he threw me hard across the room, then bolted for the door. It slammed behind him, the echo cracking through the apartment like a gunshot. Shaking, I locked the door and called the police. They came, took the report, looked around. It didn't matter. Several things were missing: electronics, valuables, small items I hadn't noticed were gone until later. The man hadn't broken in to hurt me. He'd broken in because he didn't expect me to come back. I'd walked in on him mid-robbery. And the worst part?
If I hadn't felt that prickle of someone watching me, if I hadn't turned, he might have stepped out of that shower with far different intentions.